Aquaman and Dora the Explorer team up to take down a sketchy corporation in the new Netflix action movie Sweet Girl. Well, that's not quite right, but it's sort of on point. A husband lost the love of his life to a pharmaceutical company's greed, and his daughter is without a mother, and he's now without justice. For now. Jason Momoa and Isabella Merced star as father and daughter who face a bunch of tragedy and then go on a quest for justice. There's a quick opening scene, and then the sequence that follows is really emotional and I thought impacting. It established our characters really well without a ton of dialogue, and worked to connect me with Momoa and Merced's characters. The sequence takes place in a hospital where we watch the mom slowly get worse from cancer. It's kind of a standard way to create emotions, but I found it effective and it got me engaged with the story. I like that Momoa is tough, but he's not fully adept at every means of battle within the story. He's an effective fighter, which is in line with the training we watch him perform in a gym. But when he goes to shoot a gun, he's a terrible shot. And I like that the story didn't make him proficient at that because there was no backing for it. He's not like some super warrior who can just pick up any weapon and go ham on someone. Momoa is also incredibly emotional in this, and he's a very sympathetic character. While some of the situations are a bit fantastical, he still feels like a convincing and grounded character whose actions are born out of necessity. Merced works well within the story too. She has a softness to her, not childlike, but more so thinking and rational, but also scared for her father's well-being. And she's tough. And just like Momoa, there are sequences where we watch her train in the gym in hand-to-hand combat, which makes her a very proficient fighter. There are a few other characters who aren't terribly well developed, but they still work to varying degrees within the story. Justin Bartha plays the head of a pharma company, and because of his actions, he's obviously not the good guy. We really only see him in two situations, and neither of which is he sympathetic. He comes across as cold, greedy, disinterested, and Bartha sold those characteristics convincingly, making him a slimeball undeserving of any compassion or understanding. Amy Brenneman plays a senator whose platform is to hold pharma companies accountable for pricing and ensure that affordable care is available. Now, she's underdeveloped and almost treated as an afterthought. She's great as a talking head in one sequence, but then in subsequent scenes, she lacks the emotional punch and the weight that her character is supposed to possess. The antagonist's motives are fairly weak in the movie too. They make sense for the story, but only to a degree. In the grand scheme it fits, but when it comes to all the nuances, several of the actions are a stretch to become believable. And I think the story had the opportunity to develop the motivations of the villains and the plot to create a greater conflict. But because they don't, what we get is a chase movie that can make us end up feeling cheated more than anything. And the chase ultimately doesn't make a whole lot of sense when everything is examined. The ones chasing and the ones being chased just don't have much motivation for the pursuit. Now, the action is exciting when it happens. A lot of it requires us to suspend some belief and allow the plot conveniences to work their magic, but the hand-to-hand battles can be a lot of fun. There's one that takes place in a service elevator that looks especially painful, and then another one that takes place on some stairs that's pretty wild too. They're not very plausible, but they're still entertaining. Now, for me, the pace of the storytelling was uneven, even though I was fully engaged. The story fluctuated between speeds, never really sticking to anything steady. And I was on board for this being a slower action movie. Because of how the beginning had built up the characters, I was invested and I wanted to take the journey with them. I didn't need it to be fast, but I would have appreciated it at least being consistent. Now, at first when I watched the opening scene, I didn't like it. It opens with an action sequence that just doesn't feel original. But when we revisit the scene towards the end of the movie, I came to appreciate the opener for what it set up. And now what I think comes next could make people hate the movie. I particularly enjoyed what they did because it subverted my expectations. I thought it was unanticipated and it added a good complication to the story. From there though, the movie still has about 20 or so minutes left and it feels like it drags as the story reaches its conclusion. There's a bunch of downtime that doesn't work much to keep the momentum going. There's also a fight scene that becomes completely unrealistic and even cheesy, and it broke me out of the movie and actually caused a bunch of disappointment. And then the way the story wraps up just felt very anticlimactic. I was on board for everything up until the end, and then it just fell apart. Now, IMDb has the movie listed at 96 minutes in length. That's not correct. The movie is really an hour and 50 minutes, and it's a little too long. Some of that comes from the last portion of the film, like I just mentioned. There are other portions within the story that don't accomplish much other than adding time too. I don't typically focus on it too much, but the actual film quality was uneven in this. At points it had this cinematic look to it that was all color corrected, and it had a film-like grain to it. Other times, though, the footage looked like it was shot during a soap opera, where you have just harsh lighting, and it lacked some of the cinematic quality that the other scenes possessed. So overall, Sweet Girl had some surprises to it that I enjoyed because of how unexpected they were. The action was exciting, and Momoa turns in a surprisingly emotional performance that made me really appreciate his acting and his character. Beyond that, the story is full of conveniences and includes an underdeveloped plot and antagonists that don't have fleshed out motivations. The pacing is also uneven, leading to a story that feels like it takes too long to accomplish. I wanted to like this more, especially given a reveal that caught me off guard. There's no sex or nudity, but a lot of profanity and violence. I give Sweet Girl 2.5 out of 5 couches. Do you have a favorite performance of Momoa or Merced? I really liked her in Instant Family and even Dora, but I'd love to know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.